We're known for the best brisket in Chicago. We work really hard to provide the area with true craft barbecue. Our customers are regulars here because they love the atmosphere. Brisket.
Dominique Leach is the owner and chef at Lexington Betty Smokehouse on Chicago's South Side. She opened in 2019 and, like other restaurateurs in Chicago and across America, has seen firsthand how the surge in inflation over the past 5 years has affected small businesses.
I'll bring it over to you when it's ready, okay? Thank you. Everyone's favorite, our brisket that we're known for. 2 years ago, I was paying $3.80 per pound. Today, I bought brisket for $4.60 per pound, which means we have to sell it at a higher price. Inflation is really affecting the restaurant because we have to spend more money on product, therefore increasing the prices for our customers. It makes it really uncomfortable. You typically have to give people an explanation. Why is brisket by the pound more this week than it was last week? It disappoints people.
The challenges facing Leach play out across America, even as inflation falls from the dramatic highs of 2022. A recent survey found that 24% of small businesses identified inflation as the top problem they face.
I think one of the things that we've learned in the last 2 or 3 years is people really, really hate high inflation.
But do people who aren't on Wall Street even care that the Fed has a 2% target? The impact of inflation is often felt more acutely in rural areas where household wealth tends to be lower. With far less disposable income, those earning the least have to dedicate a greater proportion of their income to everyday necessities. That divide is compounded by the fact that wealthier Americans, often found in urban areas, have relied on a booming stock market to increase their wealth and offset some of the effects of inflation. Is the experience of inflation different here in your district, in the Midwest and to the West, than it might be in New York on Wall Street?
I think so. I mean, I think especially when you go out to rural communities, we have a lot of rural areas, the challenges that families are facing are different. I mean, they're all facing the higher prices that virtually all Americans have faced, but they also have acute challenges. Hospitals are closing in many rural districts because there's not enough population to support those hospitals. In some cases, colleges and universities are closing. It's hard to get home construction built, even though there's a lot of land available. Getting new construction and new development built. So the challenges in rural communities are different, but a lot of times they're driven by price as well. So there's some important similarities, but there's some specific differences in rural communities.
For the likes of Neel Kashkari and Austin Goolsby, a large part of their districts cover vast rural areas. While a big focus in John Williams' jurisdiction is naturally on Wall Street in New York City, where analysts and traders immediately dissect any inflation data, not just looking at the headline number, but peeling back the layers to look at individual contributors, which can vary widely.
You get the headline number, the core number. Literally the next second I look at services. So services versus goods. Then I look at where's shelter. And what has been high, so what's keeping inflation high is not a broad-based higher inflation across. Then I would be a little nervous that are we getting stuck somewhere above 2? It's really a couple of components. It's shelter, it's lagging, Zillow rents are coming down. It's just taking a while. People who own their homes, it takes a while for that to show up in the data. So there's a lag there. Auto insurance, medical insurance, these are imputed numbers. That's why I think it's actually good for them to have that flexibility, because why should they keep policy high just because shelter inflation, which is owner's equivalent rent, is running above target just because it's adjusting slowly.
For those in the markets every day, like J.P. Morgan's Priya Misra, communication is a critical part of a Fed president's job, and a clear target, 2%, makes that job a lot easier.
Well, you know, inflation is different in different parts of the country, and it can be different at different times. I think that, you know, where this became easier, unfortunately, was when inflation was high, and everybody said inflation. It was high everywhere. Inflation was clearly damaging to the economy. It was harmful to families and businesses. Everybody wanted to see inflation lower. I think the communication of the 2% goal was incredibly powerful during this period, because we weren't questioning we should get inflation to, what does good look like. We said absolutely, we need to get to 2%. We're consistent on that. And I think people understood that, the importance of price stability, the importance of getting inflation back down. I think that was, regardless of all the debates of exactly how did you come to 2%, it was a very clear, strong message. It's a message that Chair Powell repeated over and over that, we're not compromising on achieving that.
That's not the kind of analysis Americans elsewhere are making. They see inflation in the supermarket, at the pump, and in their rent. They're still coming to terms with so-called sticker shock, something Goolsbee and Kashkari say requires a different kind of communication.
We do a lot of conversations with labor unions, and one of the sources for me of information about people's expectations, in economics we talk about expectations matter, inflation expectations matter. We talk to labor groups about what wage rates they're negotiating in their multi-year contracts to look at what is the inflation embedded in their own thinking looking ahead 2 to 3 years. Now, as they're having their negotiations, they may not be thinking, well, my inflation expectations are X and I need this kind of wage growth. But it's clear that inflation is woven into the fabric of their thinking about the economy and the future. So it does register. They may not be as technical as a Wall Street analyst in how they talk about it, but it's present in their thinking.
Inflation is eating away at the funds available.
Go back to the inflation of the 1970s, 80s, Paul Volcker's time in office, and people would do things like bring 2x4s and throw them in front of the Fed because they were mad at the level of interest rates. You're in a kind of ironic situation. People hate inflation, but they get mad at the people whose job it is to fix it.
Look, that's true. Nobody's ever like, my greatest central banker. They're just mad if you don't do the job to keep inflation low. I was a close personal friend of Paul Volcker. He's a personal hero of mine and mentor. His widow, Anka, gave me that original 2x4 that they sent to him. Somebody scribbled on the top of it, please reduce these insane interest rates. And I keep that in my office on the shelf right next to my desk here at Chicago Fed as a reminder of two things. One, the decisions that the central bank makes affect regular people, regular businesses, regular consumers quite directly. And two, sometimes if it starts going wrong, you got to make tough decisions. What we want to, once we're in this experience, is have wages growing faster than prices. And the good news is, lately, that's what's been happening. And as productivity grows, we can do that even more so. But if you talk to regular people, I kind of think the world of inflation targets is not in their space. They're like, why is it so expensive?
The dynamics you just described about wages and prices, I imagine that most of the people you talk to when you go around in the district and speak, they don't understand that. They don't think of it that way.
I think it's true that most people do not think of it that way. And if you look in the surveys, they're extremely upset about inflation. And then if you say, but look at your wages, they tend to say, I earned the wage increase I got out of my hard work. The inflation I had nothing to do with, and so that's the part that makes me upset. They are, in reality, tied together, wage growth and price growth.
On the surface, wages are growing faster than inflation. The latest reading had wage growth at 4.2% compared to an inflation print of 2.9%. Wages are going up. But are they going up enough to offset the significant period of time where high inflation comfortably outpaced any growth in wages? It turns out that since the end of 2018, inflation still outpaces wage growth overall. And who's benefiting from that wage growth anyway? While all income groups have seen wage growth in the last year, historically, America's wealthy have seen their average earnings grow 46.2% since 1979, compared to just 17% for its lowest earners.
The overwhelming message that we've received and that I have received is, hey, high inflation is really bad. It was very painful for my family. It was very painful for my business. Get it all the way back down. They might debate whether 2% should be the right target or 1% or 0, but get it all the way back down to what we were used to before the pandemic.
And they probably couldn't necessarily put an exact figure on what they were used to before the pandemic. So I wonder, is the 2% target necessary?
It is necessary. It's necessary because those Wall Street analysts that you talk about, they are very active in financial markets. We know that most financial products ultimately get priced off of, for example, the 10-year Treasury market. So it is important that the people who are professionals in investing and in forecasting understand what we're trying to do and have confidence that we're going to achieve it. So I do think having a specific numeric target is very helpful. It becomes self-reinforcing the more we demonstrate our ability to hit it. But it needs to be a low enough number that people on Main Street don't need to spend their time thinking about it. They have better things to do with their time than thinking about inflation. That's our job, to get it back there.
From Wall Street to Main Street, inflation is felt by all, and target or no, ultimately the real goal is former Chair Alan Greenspan's definition of price stability, when people don't think about inflation at all.